Well, I thought I'd begin with a confession this morning. So most of you know that I've been working part-time at Domino's, delivering pizzas in the evening the last 4 years, going on 5 years. And while I mostly enjoy it, and I do mostly enjoy it, I occasionally run into people who get under my skin. And it's really pretty much just entitled customers. I'm embarrassed to admit that there have been times where I didn't handle it very well when a customer was entitled. And I've never done anything gross to anyone's food before I delivered it to them or anything like that. I mean, I have a conscience. But I've definitely messed with people. So for a while, and the thing I appreciate about the Domino's here locally in Eagle, which is where I work, if we have a customer who's particularly belligerent and is unkind to our delivery workers and doesn't tip on top of that, we just ban them. They can't order from us anymore. So that eventually happened to this guy. But we had a guy who ordered for a while. He lived locally, and he was really, really angry and would say all kinds of stuff to us in the comments of his order. And then if we didn't, do exactly what he wanted, he would come out and yell at us. One time I pulled up and he came out of his door and he started yelling at me to put the food on the ground. I mean, he's just kind of crazy. And so we were trying to work it out with him, but he has this huge porch and he's got lots of stuff just everywhere in his porch and projects he's working on. And so he started getting to the point where he's just deliver it and leave it on the porch. And because he had mistreated me many, many times and he was a jerk in the comments, and I knew that he wasn't going to tip me. So I would always leave it on his porch, but I would make it a treasure hunt for him. So because he had so many things on his porch, I'm I'm going to do exactly what he said, but I'm going to go over here and lift up this thing and set it there and put that over there, and then I'm going to stack this stuff and then ring his doorbell and go get in my car and go back. And then he would call the store. They didn't leave the pizza. And then be like, did you leave? Yeah, he says it's on your porch. Oh, I can't find it. Well, it's there somewhere. So I did that probably to him a handful of times. And I'm not proud of it, all right? But it's maddening when people act like, well, I shouldn't have to ask nicely or say thank you because, well, clearly I deserve it, right? That's obnoxious and it's frustrating. And to which I go, you know what you deserve? You deserve hidden pizza, sir. That's what you deserve. But entitled people, they're the worst, right? Nobody has ever looked at somebody who's acting really entitled, who's throwing a fit in public and causing a scene and thought, man, I really want to be more like that guy. No, they get out their phone and they go, I really want to capture this on video and post it later so everybody can laugh at that guy and see what an idiot he is. In fact, everybody enjoys it, right? When somebody who's acting like that gets served a nice giant slice of humble pie, when they get a reality check, when someone puts them in their place. And it's especially hard to deal with when somebody's being entitled, when it's somebody it's not a stranger, it's somebody you're in a relationship with. So decades ago, the writer and thinker Dale Carnegie, after a lifetime of studying people and communication and relationships, he said this. He said 15% of success in life is connected to your technical skill, but 85% is actually due to skill in what he called human engineering or relationships. In other words, that the quality of your life will be determined by the quality of your relationships. But we all know that healthy, life-giving relationships don't just happen. They're built, to which that's what he's referring to, that idea of human engineering, that it's a skill. It's something that we can learn and get better at, which is exactly why we do Family Month. That's why we're talking about the power of our words. How many of us would be honest this morning and raise your hand and just admit, when it comes to our relationships, that you have a person or a place or a circumstance or a thing that you wish would be just a little bit better than it actually is? Anybody have a situation like that? Certainly. I have my hand up, my hand's raised for sure. And how many people would be really, really honest this morning and you would go, it's possible that right now somewhere else that someone is raising their hand in response to that same question, only I'm the image that they're thinking of in their head? Anybody willing to admit that? Definitely. I got my hand up in that one too. Because relationships are messy, right? They're hard. And I think if we're being honest, as much as we all hate when other people are entitled, we'd have to admit that we have had moments where we've acted that way sometimes too. Because things like entitlement and like so many other attitudes and behaviors are really, really easy to see in other people, but also really difficult to see in the mirror. I love how short and simple and to the point that Philippians chapter 2, verse 14 is. It says this, it says, do everything without grumbling, which is kind of what being entitled is. I didn't get my way. This isn't what I wanted. I deserve this, right? Do everything without grumbling or arguing. I actually like the amplified version of that verse. It says this, it says, do all things without grumbling and fault finding and complaining. Whew. So let's just close in prayer. And that's going to be a challenge for the rest of the week, right? For the rest of our lives. Let's just stop there. Grumbling, fault finding, complaining, like do everything without that. What would we do with our time in our country? Like those are our favorite pastimes. I mean, have you been to social media lately? Honestly, for me, the most annoying word in that verse is the word everything or all things. Because I think like I can do a lot of things without grumbling and complaining, but everything? I could do most things. But seriously, everything? I mean, most of us would probably never berate a delivery driver over not putting our pizza in the precise place that we wanted it. And most of us are not normally the kind of people who would cause a scene in public. But have you ever been in an airport when the airline starts jerking you around and then the flight starts getting canceled? Whew, isn't that fun? Right? You start hearing things like, I'm a gold star this, and I'm an elite status that. And do you know how many times I've traveled? And do you know how much money I've spent? And my husband's uncle's wife's son from her first marriage works with a guy who's best friend with the regional manager's secretary. You better get me on that plane. Right? Like you just hear all kinds of stuff. Because the truth is, we're all guilty of acting entitled at times. But like I said, it's nearly impossible for us to see it in ourselves, especially when it comes to our relationships. And you wouldn't think that this would be the case because it's kind of counterintuitive. But it turns out that the closer and more comfortable the relationship is, the more likely we are to be or act entitled. Which is interesting because for most of us, from the moment that we could speak, we were taught one simple little magic word. The word please, right? I mean, we teach our kids all kinds of things, all kinds of magic words. Use your nice words. We want to try it again. This is a magic word. You got to say the right words. We teach our kids. I remember when our kids were little, teaching them to look people in the eye and shake their hand and speak with how to use their voice. But teaching kids to say please is at the top of that list of things that we teach them, right? To be nice, to actually be kind, to ask please, to use the word please, because if you've ever been around toddlers or preschoolers, they're the cutest and most amazing and adorable, self-absorbed, self-centered, demanding, and entitled little jerks you've ever met. They are. Now, the goal of today isn't just to try to get us to all just say please more than we currently do, although that would be a good start. But the goal for today is to get us all to walk into the house of our closest relationships and be honest with ourselves about their condition. And then to be able to grab onto some of the tools, to some of the wisdom from the scriptures and get to work both to strengthen and enhance those things that are good and strong, but also to strip away, to maybe strip down to the studs and begin to rebuild and repair those places and those areas, maybe even those entire relationships that need work. I don't know about you, but there's not a lot that can cause me to feel like murderous rage, like calling into somewhere and getting stuck in an automated system and you can't figure out how to do the thing you need to do or how to get to an actual person. But as much as I hate it, nobody hates it as much as my wife, Hansi. Like it is maybe, like she is the sweetest person. Yes, that is actually her. That is her 100%. I've walked in and she'll be like, representative. I'm just like, why are you screaming? It doesn't help. She's just like throwing the phone down. But she is kind and loving and polite. And as that drives her crazy. But if she gets to a real person, man, look out. because by the end, they will be falling all over themselves to give her whatever that she wants. Like, I've lost count of how many times, like, she's been on the phone. I'm like, are you still talking? Like, I thought they solved that. She's like, yeah, but they're telling me their life story. And then she's like, I'm going to pray for them in a minute. Right. The other day, like, there's been times where I've been talking to her. I'm like, who are you texting? She's like, that one lady that helped me at that company. I'm like, she gave you her private number? Like, what is going on? Well, why does that happen? It happens because of the atmosphere that she's able to create everywhere she goes. She's just amazing at it. And so that's where I kind of want to start with this idea of the word please. See, please is an atmosphere creator. It's like a prompt that comes from politeness that levels the playing field between you and other people, regardless of whatever the power dynamics that might exist in that relationship or between you and that other person. Please can both create atmosphere and change it. Have you ever been in a situation where you got off on the wrong foot and you were just like, oh, shoot, like, yeah, I got to back up. And so then you're like, okay, take a deep breath and you start again. And now you're being kind and sweet and you use the word please. And the whole thing starts to shift. The whole atmosphere of the exchange begins to turn. Why? Because it can create and change atmosphere. So there's an interesting story in the Old Testament about a guy named Daniel that really kind of illustrates this perfectly. And so in Daniel's story, war had broken out between Israel and Babylon, only it was a pretty short war. It was pretty one-sided. Babylon easily defeated Israel. But instead of killing or enslaving the people of the nations that they conquered, Babylon would find the best and the brightest of those places, and then they'd take them back as prisoners of war. They'd take them back to Babylon to be trained and to serve in the administration of the king. And that is exactly what is happening in the story where we're going to pick it up here in Daniel chapter 1, beginning with verse 5. It says, then the king ordered Ashpenaz. Ladies, if you're pregnant, you're looking for names. So then the king ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff. May I call you Ashy? I think we're going to call you Ashy. To bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. No dad bods allowed. Make sure they are well-versed in every branch of learning, are gifted with knowledge and good judgment, and that they love their mamas, and they have a great sense of humor, and they're about 6'3". Oh, that's your dating profile. That's not this. All right. He says, and that they're suited to serve in the royal palace. And he says, train these young men in the language and the literature of Babylon. And then the king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. And they were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter the royal service. So, honestly, when I read that part of the story, when I read that, I'm like, okay, that's not a great situation, but as forced labor goes, it could be worse, right? I mean, you could be a lot worse. I mean, I'm not good looking and have all the knowledge, and so I don't make that cut, but if you fit that bill like Daniel did, like that's a pretty good gig, right? Especially when you're a POW, when you're like a servant, you're like borderline, they can enslave you. You have to do like, and so that's actually, when we read the story, it's easy to go, well, it doesn't seem that bad. But I want you to get what the atmosphere is here, right? They had just been conquered. They'd been carried off against their will, away from their families, away from their land, away from their culture, right? You have no rights. You have no voice. And this is why I want to actually dive into this story, is because it's such an extreme example that if something like please, if words can actually work in a situation like this, if the posture that you take when you're dealing with people can make a difference in a situation like this, it can certainly make a difference in a situation like what you're living with in your family. Because it's not a hostage situation, right? You're not a servant or a slave. You weren't carried off against your will. So this is the atmosphere here. It's not time to stand out or draw attention to yourself. It's certainly not time to make any requests or demands. It's time where you should just, the atmosphere is you should just shut up, keep your head down, and do what you're told. But not Daniel. Daniel chapter 1, verse 8 says, "But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and the wine given to them by the king. And so he asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat those unacceptable foods. And God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel." Okay, so wait. What's going on here? Like, he's turning down the best part of being carried off and being a servant. He's turning down the king's food and wine. Daniel, did you get hit in the head in the battle? Like, what's going on? What are you doing? Love your life, man. Enjoy the feast. Drink the wine. Have a good life. But this isn't an arbitrary protest, right? See, the strategy that the Babylonians are using is really an all-out effort in indoctrination. Because they're like, you're going to learn our language, you're going to learn our literature, you're going to leave behind your Jewish ways, you're going to leave behind your Jewish culture, you're going to leave behind your Jewish faith, and you're going to adopt our culture and our ways, and you don't need to trust in or depend on or follow your God anymore, because we'll feed you. I'll be your God. Food and wine is coming to you every day from me. You don't need to trust God. I got you. You can just trust in me. We'll take care of you. And so that's what Daniel is resisting. On top of that, the reason that the food was a big deal was because God had given the Jews very specific instructions about what was okay and what was not okay for them to eat in his laws for them all the way back in the book of Leviticus. You can go read them if you want. They were very specific things. And so, this is a big deal to Daniel. But what I want you to notice is the atmosphere that somehow Daniel had created in his relationship with the chief of staff, with Ashpenaz. It says that he had both respect and affection for Daniel. That doesn't happen on accident. That there was respect and kindness between the guy who was in charge and held all the power and the guy who was just there because he was a prisoner of war and had no power. That's not accidental. So clearly, Daniel didn't come out of the gate, didn't come through the door making demands and just going, you're not going to break me. No, he actually had built a relationship. He had built trust. He'd invested in this relationship of this guy that's in charge of him, that holds his very life in his hands. Now, normally, anybody that knows me, you know that I'm typically an ask for forgiveness, not permission guy. But also, I recognize that there have been plenty of times in my life where that's gotten me into trouble that I could have easily avoided. And so Daniel doesn't just ask for forgiveness. He doesn't just say, I'm not doing that. He doesn't, put his foot down. He doesn't take a stand. No, he makes a request. He asks permission. He leads with please. Why? Because please is an atmosphere creator. So, hurricanes have obviously been in the news a lot lately for obvious reasons. It's been devastating to see the aftermath of both Helene and Milton. We partnered a couple of weeks ago. Our church together sent over $7,000 to an organization called Convoy of Hope, who is on the ground there, has been on the ground since the day of, is doing incredible work. But the reason I bring up hurricanes is because they don't just happen. Hurricanes don't just happen. So scientists tell us that to create a hurricane, there are 4 things that are required. You need warm water that's at least 80 degrees, and it's got to be about 160 feet deep. You need moist air. You need converging winds. And if you have all of those 3 things together wrapped up, you need time. If you have enough warm water, moist air, converging winds, and time, a hurricane can form. In fact, what they tell us is that if you have ample amounts of each of those elements, it's not a matter of if one will form, but only when one will form. Now, you didn't come to learn anything about meteorology. Here's my point. I don't think that that's just true of hurricanes. I think that it's true of relationships. And what I mean is that every relationship develops in an atmosphere that's perfectly formed to create exactly what it creates. In other words, if you have a relationship that is life-giving to you, that's flourishing and healthy, that isn't perfect, but has a spacious sort of grace to it, that's full of deep devotion, that doesn't just make you stronger and happier, but it makes you better, you might not even know how or why, but you have somehow figured out the mixture and the ingredients. You've created the atmosphere that's producing exactly that kind of relationship. And the flip side is also true. If there are relationships that are in your life that are draining, that are sort of or maybe fully toxic, where there's not just conflict, but there's also judgment and contempt, or where you feel trapped or stuck in just repeating the same patterns over and over and over again, that relationship has come together in a way or has drifted in a direction that's perfectly tuned to create exactly what it is. Because every relationship develops in an atmosphere that's perfectly suited to create the kind of relationship that it does. So I wonder, if you were to look around at your relationships, if you were to look around at the ones that are really good and healthy and strong, if you were to look around at the ones that are struggling or where there's pain or there's something going on, I wonder what it would tell you about the atmosphere that's been created in those relationships. And then what you could do about changing that atmosphere. By the way, there is one other sort of interesting thing about hurricanes that I think also applies to relationships that scientists have discovered, and that is that third element, the whole converging winds part of it, they describe that element as opportunistic, meaning that hurricanes often form by feeding off of other storms that are already there, that conditions that are already in existence. And I actually think that there's a level at which that's true in our relationships as well. See, for better or worse, the atmosphere of our relationships forms and develops based off the elements, not just that you put in, but then how those things interact with whatever life is throwing your way and all of the things that you have to deal with that are out of your control. And so the question I have for you this morning is, what are the elements or the ingredients that form a strong and healthy relationship? How do we find those? Well, obviously, like we could probably spend the rest of our time here. We could probably say a lot of things here, but I think Ephesians chapter 4, verses 2 and 3 is a pretty good place to start. This is what it says. It says, always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love. And make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. So these words were not written to families. These words weren't written to people who were married. These words were written to people who were a part of a church in a city called Ephesus. People who were a part of a church family. But if these things apply to people who are strangers, but who happen to attend church together, who happen to be a part of God's family together, certainly they apply to us, right? Certainly they apply in the way that we approach our relationships, our family, our marriages. Always be humble and gentle, be patient with each other, making allowances for each other's faults because of your love, and make every effort to keep yourselves united, binding yourselves together with peace. And the picture that he's painting there when he's talking about binding yourself together with peace, the picture that he's painting is not one without conflict. It's actually one where there's wholeness. It's not one where there's peacekeeping at all costs, where there's this artificial harmony. It's actually about genuine connection. It's this sense that we're going to decide that we might disagree. In fact, we're probably going to disagree, but we refuse to allow our disagreements to divide us. That's the atmosphere that please helps create. And of course, right, when you lead with please, when you create that kind of environment, you always get what you want, right? Everything you ask for. Well, no, of course not. And that's actually something that I really love about Daniel's story, that he asks permission for a special diet to abstain from the wine and the meals, but the guy initially says no. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 10. But he responded, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and this wine. If you become pale and thin compared to the other youths your age, I'm afraid the king will have me beheaded. So is that like a no or a... Now, I know you might have been in some tense and high-stakes relational situations in your family, but the good news is nobody is at risk of being beheaded. Yay. But I think that the official's answer, though, really illustrates something that's actually kind of important for us to kind of keep front and center when it comes to this idea of relationships. And that is that the relationship you have with others is rarely the relationship that they have with you. I know that's like, whoa, okay, what? Stop for a second. It sounds a little bit confusing. You might need a little bit to think about it. But I'll say it again. The relationship you have with others is rarely the relationship they have with you. And it's when you see what I'm talking about, it's so simple, it's silly, but we often forget it. Because what I mean is like you only experience the relationship that you have from your side of it. Because that's all you can do, right? But because of that, it's easy to assume that they experience the relationship in the same way that you do. But that's almost never the case because they're not you. They bring different backgrounds and experiences and the family of origin and baggage and all kinds of things to the relationship, not to mention all of the present day real-time realities of their life versus yours, of what they're dealing with on a day in and day out basis. And then you layer on top of all of that, all of the like possible nuances and the different positions that you hold or take and the different patterns in the relationship, the unique realities of the relationship. Man, it gets really complicated really fast. And what they're experiencing as part of the relationship is not what you're experiencing. See, in the story, Daniel had a really good working relationship with Ashpenaz, but he was also at a complete disadvantage because old Ashy held all the power in the relationship. And when you think about it, no matter what your family's like, the chances are you're not in any sort of relationship that's that one-sided or lopsided. And if it's possible to create or change the atmosphere so that it's one of respect and affection in that environment, it's possible for you to do it in your situation. And by the way, although Ashpenaz held all the power, his reality was pretty intense too, right? Because he's like, hey, like if we do this, if we try this and it fails, like it's not just that you die, it's that me and probably all my family die, that we get beheaded here. And I think this is partly why the relationship you have with others is rarely the relationship they have with you, is because they have pressures and constraints and stresses and demands that are unique just to them and their situation, just like you do. And you might, so when you come and you go, hey, this is what I want to happen, or this is what I'm looking for, and at first they push back or they resist, you might be tempted to think, well, they're just being a jerk, or they're trying to keep you from getting what you want, but maybe they're just trying to make it through the thing that they're dealing with on their end. In Philippians chapter 2, verse 4, the Apostle Paul is writing these words, and he says, don't look out only for your own interests, but look out also for the interests of others as well. Notice that he doesn't say to not look out for your own interests. He doesn't say that, right? That wouldn't be like sacrificial. That wouldn't be loving. That would just be like self-abandonment. He's like, yeah, no, of course, everybody looks out for their own interests. You have to, there's a certain part of life of being responsible as an adult where you have to take care of your own interests and yourself. But he says, don't look out only for your own interests, but look out for the interests of others as well. See, I think there are actually two kinds of people in the world. There are people who walk into the room and internally they announce, here I am. And then I think there are people who walk into a room and internally they announce, there you are. There you are. I'm so excited to see you. There you are. Look at you. You're awesome. I don't know about you, but I want to be a there you are person. I want people to feel seen and known. I want them to know that their interests and their hopes and their dreams and their struggles and their stresses matter as much to me as my own do, especially the people in my family. So look at how Daniel handles the situation and how Ashpenaz responds. I'm sure I'm butchering Ashpenaz's name, but I don't care. Verse 12. Daniel says, please test us. He's like, okay, I understand. You might get beheaded if this goes wrong. How can we help me help you? Let's come up with a plan. Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water, Daniel said. At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food, and then make your decision in light of what you see. And then the attendant agreed. We're going to stop there. It's a fascinating story. You should go and read Daniel chapter 1 and see how it turns out. But I think it's really interesting and helpful what happens here. See, entitled people look out only for their own interests, but please puts others first by humbly asking instead of arrogantly assuming or demanding. So Daniel's like, I get it, man. I get it. I don't want you to lose your head. So let's do this. Let's just try it for 10 days. Let's figure this out. See, because please, it's an atmosphere creator. It turns me into we. It takes the posture of, if it's not a win for you, then it's not a win for me, and it's not a win for us. Last week, we spent a lot of time talking about the idea of frequency when it comes to the words we use and how we communicate. That it's not just what we say, it's the intent, right? The content matters, but the intent matters, and the context matters. I think when we talk about the atmosphere and the space that's created with please, the scriptures have a word for it, and we've actually talked around it a lot today. But the scriptures use the word humility. See, that's really what we're talking about. See, the essence of please is humility. The frequency, if there's a frequency to entitlement, well, it's pride, it's selfishness, right? But the frequency of please is humility. As you might imagine, God actually has a lot to say to us about both. Maybe the most famous thing he said was actually written by Jesus' half-brother, James, in James 4, verse 6. James wrote these words. He says, he, speaking of God, gives grace generously. Aren't you glad that God gives grace generously? God gives his grace generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. God opposes the proud. God opposes the entitled, but he gives grace to the humble. He makes room for please. I actually think this is a much bigger deal than we know. But you know what else when it comes to relationships? You know who else resists or opposes the proud? Everybody. When you're in a relationship with somebody and they're proud and entitled, you're just like, stiff arm, get away from me. I'm going to resist. Includes the people that you love. Now, if you are not a Christian, if you're not a Jesus follower, honestly, all of this stuff is really helpful. It's powerful. It's wisdom that you can take and apply to your life, and it will be helpful. But you're under no obligation with any of this. But if you are a Jesus follower, this stuff is at the core of what it means to actually live your life following him. All of the verses we read today in the New Testament are all imperatives. Let me give you the first part of them again. Do everything without grumbling. It's not like, it'd be a good idea. Maybe you should give this a try. No, do everything without grumbling or complaining. Always be humble and gentle and patient. Give your maximum effort to be united and not divided. A few minutes ago, we read verse 4 of Philippians chapter 2, where he says, don't look out only for your own interests. This is what he says right after that in verses 5 to 7. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus. So he's speaking specifically, if you're a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower, he's talking to us. He's going, the person that you are following, the person that you're trying to pattern your life after, in all of your relationships, you should have the same mindset. You should approach that relationship the way that Jesus approached his life, the way that Jesus approached his relationships. Verse 6, who being in his very nature God, he was God, but he did not consider equality with God something that he would use to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, that he moved into humility. the guy who was the most right, the guy who was perfect, the guy who had every right to be completely demanding and completely entitled, the guy who was God decided, I'm not going to take the fact that I'm God and leverage that for my good. I'm going to take the fact that I'm God and I'm going to leverage it for your good. What's interesting is that, so every time this guy Paul writes, he begins with an idea about God, which we'll just call it like a theological understanding. We would call that faith, right? He begins in kind of the spiritual realm, this idea about God, this theological understanding that applies to our faith and our relationship with God. See, because there's this reality that we all live our beliefs. Like, you live your beliefs. If you want to know what you actually believe, look at the way you live. Don't look at, because we can talk about what we believe all day long, and we do. But if it's not something that we ever actually really live or do, it's not something that we truly actually believe. And so Paul, when he's writing, he always starts with this theological understanding, this idea about God that connects to our faith, but he always, always, always has it connect with this idea of character formation, or who we're becoming, or what we'll call practice. Because the message of Jesus, the scriptures for us, they aren't meant to just communicate some lofty ideas about God that we would just go, wow, that's some really interesting stuff. That's not the goal. The goal is that those ideas, that understanding, that connection with God would make its way, would find its way all the way down into the core of who we are, of who we're becoming and how we're living day in and day out. And so he starts in these verses with this incredible theological truth about Jesus, which is crazy, by the way. I mean, it's amazing. But then he says, you and I, we need to go do the same thing in our relationships. And he says that in our relationships with one another, we should live in and relate to and communicate in the frequency of humility, not pride, because the person that we say we're following, that's exactly what he did. He's going that the atmosphere of all of your relationships should be created and driven by please, not entitlement. And so here's your homework for this week. If you dare, if you have the courage, that you would sit down with your family, you would sit down with the people, whatever that looks like, however your family's constructed, whoever are the closest people to you, and you would just simply ask the question and then be quiet, and you would go, where is it that I come across most entitled? And then be quiet and don't defend and yeah, but, and you stupid, and that's not true, and how come? And just ask, like, where is it that I use my position or my gifts or my skills or my abilities or just my schedule or my reality? Where is it that I use that to my own advantage to get my way? Where is it where I am, or at least I seem to really be concerned with only my interests? And then be quiet, humble yourself, and listen. If somebody in your family has the courage to ask you this question, this is not an opportunity to pull out the big guns and beat them down, all right? And another thing, I've been hiding your pizza, right? Like that. But be honest. Say, this is the way that you come across here. And if they have the courage to answer that question when you ask it, you have the courage to humble yourself and begin to change the atmosphere by leading with please. Let's pray together.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you and thank you for watching our online service today.